Subcommittee will call to order. This is the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs and Related Agencies hearing with the VA Office of the Inspector General. I want to welcome the Honorable Michael Missel, Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Actually, welcome you back. The Office of the Inspector General serves the important purpose to combat waste, fraud, and abuse within the department and works to ensure the nation's taxpayer dollars are well spent. Take a breath for a moment. Under your watch, Mr. Missel, OIG sees a $21 return on investment for every dollar spent on your office's budget. While you are proving to be a good steward of the taxpayer dollar, VA still has many challenges that I trust are under close scrutiny by your office. We have a solemn responsibility to those who have served our country to care for their health and well-being following their service. Which leads me to say that I have grave concerns over the implementation of the electronic health record system. And I think you'll learn that I'm joined by my colleagues in that concern. We have a $10 billion contract with Cerner for the EHR system, with an additional $6 billion in infrastructure and oversight costs. The total electronic health record system modernization is projected to cost $16 billion and take 10 years to fully implement across the country. It is our responsibility, with your help, General Missel, and with the help of GAO, to oversee this enormous implementation and make sure we are actually getting what we are paying for and that it works. This includes ensuring VA has full clinician buy-in at the local levels and that we achieve full interoperability of medical records between VA and the Department of Defense. While VA is implementing the electronic health record modernization, they are simultaneously implementing Mission Act requirements, and I'd like to note that both efforts are being led without confirmed leadership in place. That is very troubling. VA recently came out with access standards that allow even more veterans to go outside of traditional VA services to receive care in the private sector beginning in June. We need to make sure that we are not pushing veterans outside of the VA system unnecessarily, and we take careful consideration of each veteran's needs and access to care. I also worry about the projected cost to implement the Mission Act standards. The President's budget requests $8.9 billion this year to implement Mission Act, and I have concerns about the reality of this number when CBO projected it would cost $10 billion. VA continues to struggle with staffing issues across the board at the leadership level and local facilities. VA most recently reported it has 49,000 vacancies, and 43,000 of those vacancies are within VHA, the Veterans Health Administration, where veterans go to receive health care. How can we properly provide care within existing VA services if VA is not properly staffed to do so? It is no wonder VA's Mission Act access standards are so expansive. As I have mentioned in other hearings, I continue to have significant concerns over the effectiveness of VA's mental health and suicide prevention programs and putting the funding that we provide to the best use, which includes actually spending the money that we provide VA for these purposes, which you know has been a problem. That being said, I'm glad to see that the President's budget request for the Office of Inspector General is at least moving in the right direction. The fiscal year 2020 budget request is $207 million, a $15 million increase over the fiscal year 2019 enacted level. However, given the wide range of new initiatives and significant challenges facing VA and our veterans, I'm concerned if this funding is adequate for the effective oversight to successfully combat waste, fraud, and abuse within the department and ensure that taxpayers' dollars are being well spent. Mr. General Missel, thank you again for joining us today. We look to your oversight and your leadership to tackle these tough issues. You do a really good job at it, and to your work with the department to provide a way forward to ensure taxpayer dollars are being thoughtfully and effectively spent, and I look forward to your testimony. And with that, I turn to Judge Carter for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and appreciate being recognized. Mr. Missel, thank you. Welcome. We've already visited a little bit here today. Glad to have you. Inspector Generals are an essential part of the U.S. government and play a key role in ensuring the effective use of taxpayer money. The Subcommittee relies on the oversight you and your team conduct for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Your work helps us see the big picture and the trends. Sometimes it even helps us and the department to nip problems in the bud. I look forward to your testimony and our discussion today on important issues for veterans in the VA, such as electronic health records modernization effort as I associate with the chair. I yield back and I look forward to visiting with you.
Thank you, Judge Carter. Mr. Missel, your full written testimony will be included in the record And I would ask members, just remind members that these mics are not as sensitive as the ones in the Rayburn House Office Building, so speak directly into them when you're speaking. And your full statement will be entered into the record, and you're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Judge Carter, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss with you some of the more significant work of the VA Office of Inspector General. The mission of the OIG is to conduct effective oversight of VA's programs and operations through independent audits, inspections, reviews, and investigations. The OIG is intensely committed to improving services and benefits for veterans and their families, as well as promoting the appropriate use of taxpayer funds. The OIG has approximately 900 staff to oversee a VA budget of over $200 billion and the work of more than 380,000 VA employees. OIG staff are organized into 5 principal oversight directorates: investigations, which focuses on criminal matters; audit and evaluations; healthcare inspections; the audit of contract review, which conducts pre- and post-award reviews of VA proposals and contracts of significance; and a new Office of Special Reviews, which reviews emergent issues of critical concern that do not fall squarely within one of our other directorates. In addition, our Management and Administration Directorate operates our hotline, which receives approximately 35,000 contacts a year and triages each one. The work of the OIG would not be possible without the support from Congress, especially this subcommittee and its Senate counterpart, in appropriating $192 million for fiscal year 2019. For fiscal year 2020, we are requesting appropriations of $207 million. This would sustain critical investments in the OIG that began in 2015 as part of a multi-year effort to meet increased oversight needs of VA programs and operations. With so many key VA leadership positions being held by those in an acting capacity over the past years, and numerous multi-billion-dollar initiatives requiring careful planning and execution in the years ahead, effective OIG oversight is particularly critical. Among the major challenges that VA faces is implementation of legislation passed during the 115th Congress, notably the VA Mission Act, the Appeals Modernization Act, the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017, and the Forever GI Bill. The OIG is monitoring, and in some cases conducting reviews of these efforts, given their impact on the services and benefits received by veterans and their families. OIG staff is overseeing other complex and prodigious VA initiatives, such as modernization of electronic health records. In keeping with our strategic plan, OIG will focus not only on the oversight of programmatic areas, such as VA healthcare and benefits, but we also examine key factors that cut across VA administrations and program offices to drive success or perpetuate deficiencies. These include VA's stewardship of taxpayer dollars, leadership and governance structures and practices, and VA's capacity for careful planning and innovation. The OIG has a number of initiatives for fiscal year 2019 to increase our oversight of VA, including the expansion of our new Criminal Investigative Development Division to intensify our identification and investigation of complex fraud cases relating to construction, acquisition and procurement, community care, and grants and education. Next, reviews of the financial management and logistic processes within medical centers by our Audit Directorate to ensure VHA is implementing prudent financial practices and effectively managing its funds, programs, and resources. And finally, the expansion of our CHIP reviews to focus on VISN-level leadership in a more systematic way. These reviews will evaluate the stability of leadership positions within a VISN and their ability to support its medical facilities in reducing risks that could lead to quality of care issues and unfavorable experience and outcomes. All OIG staff are dedicated to conducting effective oversight and are focused on making meaningful recommendations that enhance VA's programs and operations, as well as prevent and address fraud, waste, and abuse. We appreciate congressional support of OIG efforts through our appropriations, and we remain fully committed to transparency by providing full and timely reports on our activities. Madam Chair, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, General Missel, and thank you for your service. The service that you provide is truly helpful to making sure that we can conduct the oversight that we need to, and also that we can provide the best service to our veterans. With that, we'll begin questioning under our normal rules. Each member will have the standard 5 minutes, and if we could ask all members to try to ask their question and time it out so that the answer is within the 5 minutes, and I'll begin. General Missel, as you know, the electronic health record system, which I mentioned in my opening remarks, shared between VA and DoD, goes beyond just simple interoperability. It's designed to be one single system where the VA clinicians can look at and manipulate the exact same health record that DoD clinicians accessed and modified when the veteran was in active duty service. But your staff informed us that there are huge access issues here, and James Byrne, VA's general counsel, who's performing the duties of the deputy secretary, agreed that this was an issue when he testified before the subcommittee last week. This was startling news to me, actually, but according to your staff, DoD demands top secret clearance to access the DoD medical records, while VA only requires public trust. The whole point of using the same Cerner system would provide one single electronic health record to go between DoD and the VA, but the different clearance levels will prevent the seamless transfer of the single record. Can you elaborate on this, and what are I'm just going to run through a few questions, and if you can try to respond. What are the current clearance standards for DoD clinicians? Because it's my understanding that all DoD clinicians don't have a top secret clearance. What conversations has DoD and the VA had on this issue, and what is the plan to move forward to ensure complete interoperability? And I have a couple of follow-ups also.
Sure. I'm not exactly sure because it could be different at DoD depending on where they are with respect to the facilities. With respect to VA access, what they require is the VA identification card called the PIV card to go into the system.
Right.
And this has been challenging even to get a VA PIV card. In one of our reports, we looked at the Oklahoma City Medical Center. As you know, VA relies heavily on residents from medical schools to staff a lot of their services. And in this situation in Oklahoma City, it was a hard time to have the residents getting the PIV cards, which resulted in other ways, workarounds to get into the system. So given that it was hard just to get in the VA system, if you increase that security system, it's going to make it that much more challenging. We've certainly raised our concerns about it to VA. As you pointed out, VA is well aware of it, and we've been told that we're working through the system. We dedicated significant staff to monitoring what's going on, and security is one of our primary concerns.
So you're getting the same answers that we got, basically, which to me amounts to they don't know.
They don't know at this point, and we keep being told that they're working through it.
Okay. Is there a mechanism that you can use to, or does it make sense for us, as we write the chairman's mark, to put a time certain requirement for them to let us know how they're planning to proceed to resolve this?
VA has said that they're planning on starting to do pilot programs next year, 2020. So they better have it fixed by that time.
Exactly.
I just don't know when they're doing. And governance is another issue with EHRM that concerns us. Right now, we don't believe there's a good governance structure to make these kind of decisions.
That's actually my next question. And for the record, if you can ask, I want to know how the private sector is going to deal with this issue as well, but I assume that it's a similar answer. Another issue of grave concern is governance over the joint DoD-VA system. And it's my understanding that DoD right now has to sign off on any VA modifications that the VA makes to the system. It's also my understanding that despite the collaboration between VA and DoD on paper, in reality, DoD has the final decision maker, And that's extremely concerning because VA's population is much larger, offers very different care than DoD's population. So there'll need to be a lot of changes to DoD's system in order to effectively work for the VA. How can the VA effectively advocate for its needs without stable leadership? And is DoD currently taking the lead on the joint implementation merely because they signed the contract first?
We're not exactly sure, and when we asked the question of VA, they tell us that's still an issue to be worked out, which is who's going to be making the final decisions. We understand that they're working through maybe having a person who wouldn't be DOD or VA make the decision. But just to clarify what that means, is what's going on now is they're trying to make the system as consistent as possible across DOD needs and VA
Interoperable, right.
needs. They're very different needs just because of the type of patients that they have and the processes. So they have these work councils, clinical councils going on right now where they're going through the various workflows and processes. And that's where the decisions need to be made because the way DOD takes care of patients may be different than VA. And so they need to have one system which is going to meet all those particular needs. And at this point, we're not sure exactly who's making those decisions.
All this uncertainty is really disturbing. I have another section of my question, but I'll come back to myself. Judge Carter?
Well, I want to start off with kind of identify just exactly what you do, because I've been curious about this. And number one in your organization of 5 oversight directorates is investigations, which now I think, as I understand just what your statement also associates with number 5, new Office of Special Reviews. Is that correct?
They're a little different. So our investigations group focuses primarily on criminal investigations. The staff of that are federal law enforcement agents, Series 1811. They carry guns, they have the ability to arrest people, and they focus in on conduct that is criminal. The Office of Special Reviews does investigations, but they'd be of the non-criminal nature. Things like what they're working on now, they're doing a review of the OAWP. We've had a lot of complaints brought to us at OAWP.
But in your statement, you said criminal investigations.
And that's our investigations group.
All right, well, then I want to know how you view, do you go into looking at potential criminal activity as a law enforcement officer, or do you go in looking at it as a prosecutor? And there's a difference.
Correct.
A law enforcement officer says, did a crime occur? I think this guy did it. A prosecutor's got to deal with a grand jury. The prosecutor's got to deal with, can he make a case to try the case?
Right.
What view do you take as your central view? And I raise this because of the issue of the famous list that we dealt with a few years ago. False lists to get money from the VA.
Correct.
I viewed that as criminal activity.
Correct.
It was not viewed ultimately as criminal activity. I still think I was right and they were wrong.
Correct.
But that's beside the point. I think it was theft by deception.
Right.
So I want to know how you view criminal activity as a law enforcement officer or as a prosecutor. It's a difference.
Correct. Agree with you, and we are law enforcement officers. And just give you an example, and we work with the prosecutors, which are typically the Department of Justice.
Okay.
It could be state prosecutors as well that we work with. A good example is the shooting that occurred by the veteran in the West Palm Beach Medical Center a few weeks ago. We were on site immediately. We led the investigation. We're working with the FBI on that. And then if there's going to be a prosecution, the Department of Justice will prosecute that. So we'll work with them on the prosecution, but they'll take the lead on it.
So if I write you a letter and saying I've had a series of whistleblowers saying there's criminal activity going on, and it's this type of criminal activity, this all occurred,
Yes,
a criminal activity, you will look at that as a police officer,
correct,
as a law enforcement officer.
as a law enforcement.
And you make, the decision letter I get back is from the position of a cop. We don't think there's a crime here, which is basically what I got back,
Or
which I
we-
disagreed with.
Well, we could go to the prosecutor. We wouldn't make that decision.
So you'd
We would
go to
gather the
justice.
facts. We would go to Department of Justice and let them decide whether they're going to prosecute it.
Okay, so would you tell us that in the letter? Because I don't recall that being in the letter, that justice said they wouldn't prosecute. You said you found no criminal activity.
Then,
And I disagreed.
okay, then most circumstances, Department of Justice will let us say, that they determined not to go forward. I'm happy to follow up with you on that matter.
What is predictive analysis program?
That is determining the likelihood that there's a problem. So let's say there's a number of different claims, and we may look at it and say, Are a lot of these claims going to a particular zip code? Are a lot of claims going to a particular household? So we're trying to predict whether there's fraud and the risks involved there. And we're building up our capabilities so we can be more
So
proactive.
you're going to data mine that kind of issue?
Correct. We're currently doing it, but we can do it better, and that's where we're expanding.
Okay, well, I just wanted, I've always had a curiosity as to how you view what your job was. And now it's, you view your job as a law enforcement officer. I'll have more questions later.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Pingree?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here. I know this isn't always a glamorous job, and you have a lot of wonderful employees that support you, so thank you for the work that you do. I want to ask about the August report on military sexual trauma claims. It found that about half of the MST claims were denied because they were not processed properly. So this raised the strong possibility that potential victims of military sexual trauma were wrongly denied benefits that they are legally entitled to. It's been a very long, slow road, as you know, to change the culture that military leaders recognize, treat, and prevent sexual assault. I and my staff have handled maybe hundreds of military sexual trauma cases, horrible stories of men and women who can't get the benefits because the law will not help them. So we hope to update that law this year. But now you've told us that those who do muster the courage to come forward and submit a claim for compensation for their trauma are essentially cheated by the system, and it is, as sad as it is, outrageous.
Correct.
It shows that the culture of the VA is as behind the times as the DOD, and I thank you for your part in helping to change that. That means a lot to a lot of people. So I have a few questions. On agreeing to the OIG's recommendations, the Veterans Benefits Administration agreed to conduct a review of MST claims denied between October 1st, 2016 and June 30th, 2018. Take corrective action with a targeted complete date of September of this year. So are you currently monitoring the process that the VA is using to identify and review these claims?
Yes, we monitor the work that they do on our recommendations. We do that on a quarterly basis to see where they are. When we issue a report, it'll have recommendations. If VA concurs, we ask for an action plan, because we want to make sure that we think it's a workable plan to complete the recommendation. And so we have an action plan that they've committed to. They give us the date when they think they're going to be done, and then we follow up on a quarterly basis with them.
So just based on that right now, how many denied claims have been reviewed, and do they seem to still be on track to be completed in September of this year?
I don't have that number on the top of my head. I'm certainly willing to get it to you and can follow up.
Great. So one of the things that OIG found was that VBAs moved away from a structure that required specialization in claims processors, including for military sexual trauma claims, contributed to a low level of decision accuracy. VBA agreed to issue by November 30th of 2018 guidance to all regional offices to create a specialized group of claims processors necessary to handle this. So has this guidance been issued yet? Let me ask you a couple questions and you can answer them. Have you reviewed it, if they've issued that guidance? And in your assessment, do you think that the move away from specialization was a product of a culture at VA that didn't recognize the distinctive nature of military sexual trauma among service-connected disabilities that would require having specialization in order to properly assess and adjudicate?
I believe they have sent that guidance out. I can confirm that, but I believe they have. And the issue here has to do with they had a very large backlog of disability claims. So what they did is they decided to come up with what's called the National Work Queue, which is everything goes together, gets away from specialization. And it's not just sexual military trauma. We also issued a report on Lou Gehrig's disease, where again, they didn't have the specialization needed. And one of the issues we find with VA is sometimes they make changes without really planning through what are the unintended consequences of it. And I think this is a situation where they just didn't focus on the unintended consequences. We were very concerned about it. That's why we did this review. And now they've agreed, and certain of like ALS and sexual military trauma, to be going back to the specialization.
So can we follow up on how far along they are on that? And I mean, I think just for the committee's sake, it's a good reminder that when big complicated issues come up like this, the idea that the VA is just going to streamline everything and put it into some kind of little box or, use standard procedures just to make their claims processing look better does not necessarily help the people who are being challenged by it. And I really appreciate your validating that.
Sure, we will do that. Thank you.
I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree. Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I know the Inspector General's office is incredibly important to VA carrying out their mission, so I really appreciate what your office does. One of the things I was looking at the number of acting positions within VA medical centers, and it's concerning that we have so many of these positions. In fact, I think there's a recent report that 20 VA medical centers lack a permanent director. Is that number correct?
It could be. I don't have the precise numbers, but there always
Does it sound
seems to
about
be-
right?
Yes, that sounds about right.
Yeah, okay. So has the Inspector General's office looked at, what are these barriers to finding these qualified folks? Now, I never liked the idea of moving them around as was done in the past. If they're bad, get rid of them. And I understand that. I'd rather have a vacancy than have a bad person in a position. But has the IG's office done anything in that regard?
We haven't done anything with respect to the directors, but what we do every year is we do a staffing report. And a staffing report looks at the medical centers as a whole, all their staffing needs. And what we did last year is we actually surveyed them. We said, tell us what your most critical needs are. And so they responded, every one of the medical centers responded to us, so we got that. And one thing that we find frustrating is we've been doing this, I think this was our 5th year we've been doing a staffing report. We said you need a staffing model, so you know exactly what you need, where you need it. And they've been very slow in implementing it. They do have that on primary care. So if you see the primary care panel, they
Right.
not only have the providers, the physicians, the nurses, but all the other support people they need. And what we're finding is that in some of the specialty areas, they just don't have the other support they need to be able to fully implement what they
It's
have.
amazing to me that it may take a bill to require this, but there is a bill circulating right now. In fact, I've been asked to co-sponsor that would require VA to put a plan in place, exactly what you're talking about. Should that take a bill? I mean, to get these people to plan for how they're going to bring people on? That's a rhetorical question. I'm sorry, I'll let you off the hook. In December of 2017, I led on a letter to Secretary Shulkin about some of the medical doctors that were being hired at that time. They had malpractice charges, they had sexual abuse charges, several had lost their license. Now, I understand after that, several of those have been terminated. Did the IG actually investigate that situation?
We did not investigate that particular situation, but one thing that concerns us are there still are providers within the system that have, I'll call checkered backgrounds, that still remain in the system and that are a source of some of the problems we've identified. And we've talked to VHA saying they really need to do a better job when they find providers who either have a problematic background or are just not performing as well as they should be, to take more immediate action in those situations.
So we have tremendous liability out there then. Does the IG recommend that, I mean, are you going to study this issue and get the facts on it, or?
Yes, well, we have a number of situations, some reports that will be coming out shortly where we're going to discuss this precise issue, where it's a provider who's had issues that have been known to others within either the medical center, the VISN, where VA hasn't moved as quickly as they should have to deal with that issue.
Okay, so you are going to look at
Yes.
those? Okay. And finally, I think I have a little time left. Finally, in in areas like Jacksonville, which doesn't have a VA medical center, the Choice Act is very important to a lot of the couple 100,000 plus veterans that I have in my district. But one of the problems that we continually have, and I think it's interrupting some of the service through the Choice Act, is the ability of these third-party providers to get paid.
Right.
Is there a plan to look at that, to enhance that process within VA, and have you studied that as well?
Yeah, we've studied that a number of different ways. First of all, with respect to the choice billings, we've identified issues that the third-party administrators, they currently have two third-party administrators, HealthNet and TriWest, and we've identified issues with how they are billing VA. Then how the providers are getting paid. In September of last year, we published a report talking about how providers, in this case in the orthopedic area, were not getting paid as quickly as they should have in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And as a result, a large orthopedic group that VA was sending a lot of patients to left VA, or left the choice program or other
Right.
community care program.
And that's what we're experiencing in Jacksonville as well. So we really have got to get a handle on that third-party payer.
And that's part of, the Mission Act, which comes up with
Right.
expanded areas that they have to make sure they build up those provider networks.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of my favorite hearings are with GAO and people from the Office of Inspector Generals. So I really appreciate you being here today, and I'm a fan of what you and your staff and your peers across the government's doing. And let's pick up what the distinguished gentleman from Florida was talking about on Choice Program. Last September, I think it was, VA said that they're going to stop using HealthNet, right, because of a whole host of reasons. And my question, you made a statement implying that hasn't been completely executed. It was supposed to be completed by the end of January. And so first question is, has that been completed, that separation been completed? If not, what are the steps there? And then two, what is y'all's assessment on how TriWest can appropriately handle this nationwide expansion? And more specifically, have we seen a visible drop in the kind of quality of services that are veterans in places that TriOS already is, right? So, what's the status of the separation? Is your opinion on how TriWest can expand nationwide, and have we seen a degradation in service?
Sure. So I know VA is in transition with respect to the third-party administrators. I don't know exactly if HealthNet is right now off. I can check on that for you. I know they will be leaving the system. Question is, have they already done it? Because given the transition, and VA's had a hard time recruiting and accepting other third-party administrators do it, now that you have TriWest having a larger share, and we've identified significant issues that TriWest had, and so again, we're going to watch this very carefully to see if they can assume the added responsibilities that it appears to be planned going forward.
Can you give us a minute or so on your opinion on the state of the Choice Program?
The Choice Program is one that came out very quickly, that it wasn't properly planned. They didn't have in place the systems and processes they needed to effectively implement it. It's gone through a couple of iterations as they're working through it. Now we have the Mission Act, and so we're very concerned whether or not VA is going to be able to fulfill all of the responsibilities just given the past history, and we're watching it very carefully.
So what are the 2 or 3 areas within the Choice Program that's high on your priority list of things to inspect and review?
Building up the networks, particularly in rural areas
Amen, brother.
where VA otherwise cannot service. And then the whole payment process to make sure that the payments are done accurately and that the federal funds are protected as appropriately.
If you need help white gloving those issues, I'm more than welcome to join because these are issues that impact my community. The other big issue, we can't have a hearing on VA without talking about electronic health records, and we had the gentleman that managed that process here a couple weeks ago. Maybe it was even last week. The president's budget had a request for 1.6 billion. This is a 500 million more increase. How, again, your assessment of the state of play of achieving a longitudinal healthcare record between DoD and VA?
First of all, this is just such an enormous challenge. So we've done a lot of homework on this. We've talked to other healthcare systems that have converted to new electronic health record systems, including to Cerner systems. And what we keep hearing is they've never done anything so difficult. There were challenges. And these are much smaller systems than what VA has. You add on top of that DoD and combining those two. So the challenges are just enormous. And so we're very concerned about how they're going to pull this off in a way that protects funds, but more importantly, has the quality of care for patients. That is so concerning to us, to make sure that the patients get the quality of care they deserve by having the record. So we've put together various teams where we're monitoring things right now. We're actively involved with watching what VA and DoD are doing. And we'll be reporting back at the appropriate time.
I will say, for what it's worth, having watched this for 4.5 years, I feel better now than I did 4.5 years ago. But as you always know, this is why I think the Office of Inspector General is so important. What people say is happening is oftentimes different once you lift the hood and peek inside. And so we would welcome your feedback on those areas that you think need further explanation.
Well, we have professional skepticism on anything we look at, and we don't trust and verify. We are skeptical of everything, and we look at it just to give people the confidence that it really is what people say it is.
I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hurd, and I'm pretty sure that's in your job description,
Yes.
General. Skepticism. Just as a reminder, Mr. Hurd, and to the members, in last year's bill, we included an insertion of GAO into the process of oversight of the electronic health records system implementation and development, purely because of the concern that obviously we're engaging in oversight, but having eyeballs on that process throughout is going to be important and helpful. And turning back to my questions from earlier on the EHRM, the process that they're going through includes various councils and forums where you have VA doctors, nurses, and clinicians who are there to advocate for the needs, because we know that DoD had a huge problem when they didn't have clinician buy-in. Does DoD participate in those clinical councils? Do they have any decision-making authority at that level? Because you don't want to see doctors and nurses taking time out of their already very overloaded schedules at the expense of valuable time in their clinics with their patients, to have to advocate for the kind of workflows that they need to see out of the Cerner system, and then have DoD overrule their requests.
Right.
So because of that concern, can you explain the process to us and what challenges there are
Sure.
in deployment?
And I would say we see the VA clinicians working extremely hard to try to get this right. So at the clinical councils, they meet together with their Department of Defense counterparts. Department of Defense is there. We just want to make sure that the right people from the Department of Defense are there at the council meetings, meaning if it's ophthalmology, that we get the people at DoD who really have the expertise in that area. And we're a little concerned on that issue.
Do they
to
have
make sure.
decision-making authority, though?
Our understanding is that the clinical councils, they do not have decision-making. They work through the issues, and then it's moves to a black box. And that's where we're concerned, like who's making the decision? What information are they getting? And we haven't seen that yet.
Okay, but you're pursuing it?
Yes.
Wonderful. Shifting to the Mission Act implementation, the VA just came out with new access standards for travel time, distance, wait times to get an appointment, and they greatly increased the eligible population who are allowed to find care outside the VA facilities beyond the current Choice Act standards. And they are pegging this at a 20-day wait, which the VA doesn't even meet in most of their facilities now. Their average wait time is 21.6 days. So that means you've got the average VA facility that can't meet their own deadline that they set, and obviously that makes the eligible population to go outside for private care even more significant. They say that they're going to drive efficiencies, whatever that means, and that they're confident that they're going to be able to meet the 20-day criteria by June. But do you have any concerns about their true ability to create more efficiencies to meet their proposed new access standards?
We have a group that looks at access time, and what we found is that access time is inconsistent across the VHA system. We did a look at VISN 15 and VISN 6, and we found very different access times within those particular VISNs. It's also, how do you define access? There's different ways. Is it the clinically indicated date? Is it the desired date, the date that the veteran wants? And so how you start it, and that was one thing that we had concerns about, is they looked at wait times differently, how they defined it differently. So it's a fairly complicated area, and I know they've worked hard to try to clarify things and make it simpler, but there's likely more room they have to do.
Are they providing you with answers to those questions?
If we ask for it, they get us information promptly, yes.
Okay, are you planning to ask for it?
We haven't yet set up a project on Mission Act yet, but we are reviewing a number of different areas in there, including projections, how they're projecting out money and
Because you're right,
access.
consistency of how they determine wait times is going to be important.
And I think we're going to have it inconsistent throughout, because the VA system is a decentralized system, so you're going to have different access time at a facility depending on how they operate.
Okay. The current challenges within the VA from the Choice Act community care standards with transferring medical records from outside private organizations to the VA exists. Have you taken a look at that and how to address that?
Yeah, we've monitored what they're doing, and our understanding is for the new system that they have worked through how the private sector, the community providers, are going to get the records to VA into it. And again, the plan seems doable. It seems like it could work. But again, the devil's in the details and the execution.
Continued monitoring will be important.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Judge Carter?
Lots of questions. On this issue of top secret at DOD, I assume that's because they feel like, when you're talking about the people who fight the wars, they don't want the enemy to know their weaknesses or something. I don't know what it is. But I happen to know from a World War II veteran that at the end of World War II, they gave you your medical records when you got out to carry to the Veterans Administration. Now we understand it takes months sometimes to get those things. Isn't there some way they can firewall off the top secret areas that they have to do so we can get this thing done? I don't know how we, and then I just find that top secret clearance seems to be a major factor in jamming this system up. And maybe it's necessary, and then I don't know how we get past that. Do you know anything about that?
Not very much, other than I know it's an issue. I know they're working through it, and it's really up for DOD and VA to figure out how they can work it.
I know we put $1 billion a year in this forever, and it's a very big frustration level. Curiosity, are doctors subject to civil liability if they work for the VA? Can they be sued?
Under Federal Tort Claim Act, if they commit a tort, people can be sued.
So they can be sued for negligence.
Negligence, I don't think meets the standard. It's got to be higher than negligence.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought.
Yes.
Okay. So that has something to do with the fact that they can take they can take chances on people because they don't have liability issues that they have to deal with on bad doctors.
We hope they perform high-quality service.
Yeah, well,
and
that's
our
that's not a good plan.
Well, our standard is we expect them to have the highest quality services for veterans, and that's what we report on. You know, if there's
And it sounds like you're on top of the medical issues there. But, you know, when I talk to veterans, and I talk to a lot of them, I have veterans meetings all the time, always say the same thing. It's not the medical staff that are messing with us, it's the people between us and the medical staff that are messing with us. Are you looking at those people and figuring out what in the world we can do to dynamite them out of their idiotic positions they take in the VA?
we look at all levels of people who touch veterans within the healthcare system. Our report that we did on the DC Medical Center that came out last year really looked at a very comprehensive look at a lot of different levels, not only the physicians, but other levels. So, you know, the clerks, the nurses, the administrative folks. And so we reported on a lot of the different issues there. And those people are critically important to a well-functioning and high-quality medical center.
And those are the people that the veterans say they think their job is to keep them from getting service. They really believe that. They believe these people are trying to keep numbers down, and that's why they got these long waits and fill out another form and all the other stuff that they claim keeps them from ever seeing a doctor.
And what we found, and I think you find it in Central Alabama as well, is the culture of complacency. That's what we found in the DC Medical Center, where you just had people who weren't putting veterans first, who weren't doing what they needed to do for veteran. And a lot of that comes down to leadership of a facility or a visit. And so we're going to spotlight those issues, and we're going to put in recommendations so that they do improve the services at the medical centers.
Well, I hope so, because that's what our veterans are complaining about. And my neighbor to my left here is going to talk about that in just a minute.
Well,
And I'm all on board with her.
Very predictable.
And Chairman and I are planning on going to Alabama. But this is something that creates the real culture. It's not the medical staff that creates a culture that's frustrating our military, our veterans. It's the administrative staff that's frustrating them. And it's to the point where they go half crazy over it.
Right.
And sometimes you just got to blow things up when the people are acting that way. And that's why we ought to fire them if we can't get them to do it.
That's why one of our priorities, if you look at our 5 priorities in our strategic plan, one of them is leadership and governance, because a number of the issues can be better dealt with effective leaders at whatever program, facility, office that you may have. And we're looking very carefully, because if you want to make changes, it really has to start at the top of whatever that organization is.
Well, I hope you do it, because the frustration level is still very high. And you've made a lot of improvements. I'm not going to say you haven't, but they're still out there, and these guys get psycho sometimes.
Yep. Well, we
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
I've gone past my time.
Thank you, Judge Carter. Mr. Rutherford?
Thank you, Madam
I'm
Chair.
sorry, excuse me, sorry. Ms. Pingree?
Yep,
I jumped the gun.
Clearly, I was so quiet and well-behaved down
Right.
here. Out here in the wilderness all by myself. But thank you again for being here. And I just want to follow up a little more. I asked you earlier about focusing on the August report on military sexual trauma claims, and just talking about what a long, slow road this has been. It's been such a long and difficult time to get military leaders to recognize, treat, and prevent sexual assault. And I thought that the recent acknowledgement last week by Senator McSally that she had suffered rape while in the Air Force demonstrated not only the pervasiveness of the problem, but also the cultural and personal barriers that service members face coming forward, even years later. And I've already asked you a few questions about this. The VBA also agreed to update its training course for claims processors by September 30th of 2018, and said it would require the training to be completed by all veteran service representatives and rating veteran service representatives by October 31st. So I want to ask you a little bit about whether you know if these benchmarks have been met, and has VBA started its promised assessment of the effectiveness in this training. And I just wanted to remark again, this isn't the first time the VBA has been shown to be improperly adjudicating these claims, and has agreed to mandate additional training. Back in 2012, at a hearing, the VA conceded that they were improperly applying guidance on claims following MST, and people were being wrongly denied, which is basically what this report tells us again. They agreed at that point to reopen any previously denied claim for review. Then this report comes out 6 years later showing that these claims are still being wrongly denied half of the time. So in a way, I just want to know who's accountable for these ongoing errors. Is there sufficient oversight? I know you're in this process now, but this seems to be endless and not making much progress. So can you just talk about this generally as well?
Sure. I believe those two recommendations are still open. I can double check for you on that, but I do believe it is. And we can get to you, what we know about what progress they're making. But I meet with the Undersecretary for Benefits on about a monthly basis. We have regular meeting. And the issues you raise are exactly what I talked about, because I get frustrated when I see the same kind of issues over and over. And we have very candid discussions about how VBA can focus on it. Training is always a big issue. Policies are a big issue. There are a number of things that you just see over and over. And he's been in the job, I think, a little more than a year. I know he's trying to deal with issues, but, we just got to keep addressing them, and hopefully we'll keep seeing improvements.
Are there other things than what's currently been going on that can happen from your perspective to provide more oversight? It does seem like, given the length of time that we've been talking about this as members of Congress, obviously this issue's been going on much longer period of time, and the fact that, for instance, we talked about they changed their training methods and it only made the problem worse. What other oversight can we be giving them, either as this body of Congress or from your perspective as the OIG, to just move this faster and more effectively?
I think hearings like this, and there was a hearing at the HVAC on some of our benefits programs last year. I think those kind of hearings really spotlight the issues, and I think they have an impact.
Well, thank you for your work, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree. Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I kind of want to dovetail on that and put an exclamation point, I think, on the point that the judge was making earlier about these middle managers who are making some of these decisions, bad decisions, over and over again, the same issue. I know in 2013, 1.5 million diagnostic tests that have been ordered were just mass canceled. It just happened again last year, 250,000. And I know y'all are looking at that.
Right.
Is the report out on, the report's not out on that yet, right?
No, the report is not out. We're getting close to finishing a draft of it. Hopefully within the next 6 months, we'll have it out.
Okay. So these things continue to happen. And the whole accountability first act was really about somehow allowing management to hold people accountable on these things. Is there more that we need to do in that realm, or what's the answer to this?
Well,
When the same people continue to make the same mistakes.
Well, yeah, you passed legislation in 2017 creating the Office of Accountability Review, with Accountability and Whistleblower Protection.
Right.
We've had a lot of complaints about this office, as I know many of your offices have received similar complaints. We're doing a review of that office. Its first year of operations coming up on its second year anniversary, I believe, in June of this year. So we'll be having a report on that, talking about how they implemented that new initiative. But one of the things that I find particularly frustrating is that issues don't get reported up well within the VA system. That's a broad generalization, but I've seen it time and time again. So some of our more serious issues that we have out there that we're going to be reporting on soon could have been stopped sooner, and harm could have been prevented had people felt the need and the willingness to come forward with things. And that's a cultural issue.
Yeah.
So that's, again, why we're focused on the kind of issues we are. We want to see if we could break that culture so that people do come forward more freely. There's protections for those people. We take all complaints anonymously and make sure that the issues you're talking about, because we share that frustration. We don't want to see the same problems over and over
Right.
again.
And that's why as the judge pointed out, these folks who are between the medical staff and the VA patient, there's some serious problems in there that we have got to root out and rip it out by the root. The GAO just published their high-risk list again, and VA's on there once more.
And they added another area. So originally it was just VHA. Now it's procurement practices, procurement and acquisition practices. So they've added an area at VA.
Probably
for their
looking at
high-risk.
Cerner, I would imagine. Never mind. But I do want to ask this with the little time remaining I have. There's a 2-year, or I'm sorry, 2019, there's supposed to be a go live, I think, on the electronic records thing, as a piece to build onto. Does that look like it's on track, or do y'all know?
We don't know at this time. It's hard to say. We know there's a lot of tough issues they're working on, and we just don't have a sense yet of whether or not anything's going to be delayed.
Okay. I see my time's almost expired. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Chairwoman. To piggyback on that, what Mr. Rutherford was talking about, my first hearing in Congress was with Gene Dodaro, and I asked him a question in his 40-year career. Has he ever heard of anybody in the senior levels of the federal government getting fired for not meeting a deadline or cost overruns or time overruns? And he said no. When we passed the Accountability First Act, it was to make it easier to fire people who didn't do their job. And so my question is, do you know how many people have been fired for not doing their job since that piece of legislation was enacted?
I know VA has statistics on those. I don't personally, I've seen the numbers involved. I just don't know the accuracy. We have not checked to see if they were.
I hope some of those people that Ms. Pingree was talking about dealing with MST, it's same issue over 7 years. I hope some of those people were ultimately fired, and I know your office may not be the right people to ask, but we'll make sure our team asks the right folks to give us those lists of how many people were fired since then. On the issue of MST, I'm not a mental health expert, but one of the things we had a conversation on with some of the mental health experts that were here was many of our female veterans do not feel comfortable getting some of the mental health support in mixed environments. And they went on a long explanation of why this beautiful vision of the future, but the reality is there are female veterans that are not going to VA facilities because they don't like the fact that they're being put in places with men. Is this an issue that you have looked at or your office has reviewed?
We're certainly cognizant of treatment for women veterans. We're considering doing some projects on that because we know that the percentage of women veterans is going to be increasing or is increasing. And I think the projections are something like 15% in the next few years. So that's
Ultimately,
obviously
20% over the next, I think, 5 is, I think, what the...
That's obviously an important group, and we're well aware of the concerns out there, and I think we'll be doing some projects.
What do we need to do to help you go from considering to doing?
You just did it, and I'll I'll take it back, and even before you raised it, we were thinking through some projects, but we understand the even greater interest in it, and I think you'll see we'll be doing something very soon.
I don't want to speak for the chairwoman, but I believe there's probably nobody on this committee that is not interested in ensuring the quality of care for our female veterans improve, and that we do things. And one of the areas that, again, I'm not an expert, is the use of the term MST. Why did we start using that?
Right.
Whose idea was that? Is that a way to, is that to use that term to help people that have suffered from it to be able to talk about it better? Or is it an instance of trying to make what it really is, rape, not sound as harsh, right? And nobody to date has been able to explain to me why we use a term that nobody else knows what it is to describe something that's pretty horrific and shouldn't be happening in our armed services. So your opinion on that would be very welcome as you move from thinking about looking at these issues to doing something about it. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd, and I really could not agree with you more. I brought the same issue up. It feels like utilizing the acronym MST is an attempt to homogenize, gloss over, make it less painful, not for the victim, but for the reality, the harsh reality of the.
Would the gentlelady yield for 10 seconds?
I'd be happy to yield.
Again, if this is something that has been proven clinically to help the individual dealing with it better deal with it, then I think we would be supportive of that. But making sure we have that clear that there is a medical reason of using that would be interesting.
My sense is there isn't one, and that it's really more for to soften the sharpness of the reality that is that women veterans are dealing with and members of our military. Ms. Roby.
Sir, thank you for being here. I wish I had longer than 5 minutes. You are not unfamiliar with Central Alabama and all of the challenges that we have. Let me first report to the chairman that, Madam Chair, Dr. Teresa Boyd is in Alabama right now. So after our hearing here with her, the Director of Clinical Operations, she is spending time in Alabama right now, and I'm grateful for that. Let me also start by saying I believe that the majority of the individuals who choose to work at the VA are there for the right reasons, and they want to serve our veterans. That being said, there are bad actors. There continue to be very egregious examples of the culture of complacency that you already addressed. I know, again, you're familiar with some of the things that have happened at Central Alabama. I want to tell you it's not getting better. It's not. Here we sit this many years later, and it's not getting better. We just went from a 3-star to a 1-star. The reason for that is many. There are many reasons, but it's mostly based on the veterans' experience. What I want to ask you is, and you guys know, and your staff, we've met many times, we turn over every bit of information that we get, from anonymous complaints to people who identify themselves. We've had some very courageous whistleblowers that stepped forward back many years ago when we would not have known the extent of what was happening if it hadn't have been for those courageous whistleblowers. But I'm going to suggest to you that there are bad actors that are using the Whistleblower Protection Act and hiding behind it because they themselves are threatened by what's happening. So when you go into a situation like Central Alabama and you start removing people from their positions or investigating what's going on, there becomes more mistrust. more panic, am I next, and more finger pointing. And so what I want to ask is, where we very much, Congress passed, we understood that there was a need to make sure that the whistleblowers were protected. How do you, in your office, go about, I guess, I don't know the right word, but how do you distinguish between those that are real whistleblowers, that are pointing out the horrible things that are happening and putting their jobs and potential retaliation against them on the line, from those who are using the whistleblower protection to falsely accuse the good guys when they themselves are the bad actor who are contributing? And again, this is the very what my colleagues here were talking about. It's not getting better, and we feel like that this is increasingly becoming a part of the problem in that culture that you've already recognized.
Right. The way we do it is by doing our job. So we get a complaint that comes in, say, from a whistleblower. We treat all whistleblowers with respect and dignity because we want to make sure that whistleblowers feel comfortable coming to us. We want them to come to us if there are issues because they can identify things as early as possible. There have been a number of situations where whistleblowers come forward and we've done our due diligence, we've looked at it, we triaged it, and we've come to the conclusion it's not what that person says it is. And typically we'll go back to them and say, you've said X, we've looked at it, and we don't see it. And then sometimes they go away, sometimes they have other allegations. And so it's really, if we're doing our job the right way by quickly triaging and doing our initial, whether it's an inspection, an audit, investigation, if we take those steps, we have a lot of experienced people. Our staff is really terrific at quickly getting to what the issue is. Then we should be able to identify that. If we don't, that's on us, and it's my responsibility.
Well, I wish I had more time, and we can meet again together in my office. We do continue to turn over information to you that is brought to our attention. Certainly, being back on this subcommittee has we've gotten a lot of calls in the past couple of weeks. So I'm grateful to be back here. I do appreciate the work that you do. If I could, Madam Chair, just very quickly, and I have to go vote in the Judiciary Committee in just a second. But, and I know your time is limited, but back to the number of people that have been fired. I think that we need to very clearly, for the members of this committee, make a distinction between those that have been fired and those that have been removed, because the removed individuals actually get moved. So they're still within the VA. They've been identified of doing something wrong, yet they're still within the VA. So they go from one failing VA to another situation. I believe, now, I haven't followed up with you on this, but at the time, the last time I was on this committee, and when we were going through the changes at Central Alabama, I believe the former director at Central Alabama was actually the only director in the entire country that was actually fired. So I'm very curious, too, to see, since we've passed legislation and policy, how that's been utilized and what those numbers reflect in terms of getting rid of the bad actors. We are not going to get better if we continue to just shuffle people around, that it's proven that they are not doing the right thing for our veterans. So I apologize for going over, but it's very important.
We agree, and I apologize. I do need to depart to the Oversight Committee. And I will just point out that the Mission Act, and I know all the members of the minority stressed the concerns over dismissals, but the Mission Act did provide much easier pathways to dismissing VA employees. So that mechanism has been created, and we need to provide oversight over that process as well. With that concludes today's hearing. I want to remind members that our next hearing is March 26th at 2 p.m. in 2359 Rayburn. The full committee hearing room on the service installations and BRAC budget requests, and the subcommittee stands in recess subject to the call of the chair.
You know, General,